Before I start this, I just want to say spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. I'm going to talk about every friggin' plot point in Zdarsky's run through issue 36, backwards and kind of forwards at times. It's a garbled mess, but if you don't want anything in this run spoiled for you, just run away screaming. Hello, Internet! Welcome to another Wednesday serial. I'm sure many of you can guess what. Well, you're going to read the title, aren't you? We're talking Zdarsky Daredevil, and I kind of just want to frame this. I've never been a huge Zdarsky fan. I've never quite hated what he's done. Well, a few things, but there's something about the way he writes that never quite fully connects with me. So I kind of want to talk around that and whatnot. But one thing I want to point out while I'm doing this, because of how this video is going to happen, is absolutely one of the best things about this run is the covers. So we're sharing those. So we kind of jump off from this whole Matt got hit by a truck again deal and playing off of this idea of the man who fears now and he needs to rebuild himself and he's trying to do Daredevil again, but he's hampered. And so he gets into a bad situation, and then pretty quickly to press him, he runs into Punisher, and we get this scene that I've seen shared a bunch of times with Matt in kind of Daredevil, but the Punisher t-shirt, and then holding out two guns saying, like, if I did it like you did, there'd be no stopping me. It feels kind of like a mixed, jilted way to start the story, because we're exploring him trying to rebuild himself, and then we're exploring the killing morality again, which I guess would make it easier for him, but it just doesn't. Like, I get the idea, but the ethos of what we're trying to drive to in this story doesn't follow through with what we're going on and bringing in the Punisher, and so we get to a lot of it, and then we get to heroes trying to stop him, and so like kind of like the Defenders team comes in and deals with him again, a la the mini that had just happened, and he finds out that they had all killed someone at one point or another and wigs out. And then he has this quick conversation with Spider-Man later, who's similar but different. I don't know where they're trying to place that, whose voice is very strict, not trying to take the edge off at all, which has happened with Spider-Man, but not in these contexts. In these contexts, he's usually somewhat socially awkward. And Zdarsky writes him this way as like this moral authority for Matt, which comes up directly later. But it's weird because that's not Zdarsky's Spider-Man that he wrote earlier. It's not in the tone of even like the JMD Spider-Man. It's just weird. I don't know. Really didn't like that. So then we get to no devils, no God, and then we start building this idea that there's three main characters for this run of Matt Murdock, Daredevil, wherever he's resting on Daredevil at the moment of the run, and then Wilson Fisk, and then Elektra. And then we have some other bigger ones as we go through. I actually found Wilson Fisk's run to be more interesting throughout most of this run. And we get this big deal of this book clerk that Matt is hitting on, who at first has no attraction to him, then brings him to this dinner. You find out it's the head of this crime family, and the mother is this big crime lord and has been forever. And the woman Matt's been hitting on has a husband and a daughter. And eventually there's a big blow up when the gang wars start happening, and then the wife that Matt was hitting on disappears, but the mother becomes a recurring character until the very end of the run. Figure that out. But in here, through this No Devil's Only God, is when I started appreciating the book. But it's weird because, like, so much of this run, we don't really have Daredevil. We don't really have the costume. We have kind of this mask ideal. We see it here in black, but really in the comic we have him in white and then some sort of civvies, but like dealing with and trying to deal with the fact that he can't just let these crimes happen around him without interfering in some way, because he has ability that others don't, and he feels this very interesting thing that I haven't seen so much before, where he's saying God gave him these gifts, and it's very Christian related and doing that. And that's doubly weird because throughout this there's the echoes of the hand happening, and so the fact that he's still so devoted Christian now but dealing with other religions and having met gods and whatnot, it's weird. Then we get to Through Hell, and we get a lot of build, and there's a lot that happens here with Fisk's rise to power. He's already mayor, governor, but you know, in charge of New York City in a new way, and he's trying to leave the kingpin life behind and take on this new role, but understand that he can't just relinquish it. So he tries to put these things in order when we get this introduction of these billionaires, some of the richest people in the world supposedly, and their designs for bits around Fisk, and trying to make points of him about how power actually functions. I think that this aspect of society, and kind of a play that Zdarsky makes a lot through the Daredevil run, is a much more socially conscious idea. And so that happens at higher and lower levels, and this is the higher level that happens with Fisk in the pursuit of power. And it's interesting, but we also see Fisk kind of react to this in a certain way, even though there's only a certain lack of resources he has in comparison to this. He can only fight it so much. I think it's interesting, but I also think it's this conspiracy level idea of billionaires and how they manipulate the world through different actions, which has varying levels of truth. In this, I skipped over how a big part of Daredevil coming back was that there was this cop who's real good at his job, and in coming into New York and dealing with the amount of dirty cops and everything going on, he's supposed to be like focused on the job, and then through Daredevil he learns that like this idea of what's right isn't necessarily the system, but like fighting to make right within a semi-broken system. It's a kind of interesting play, but because the characters that Zdarsky are building are so one note, there's no range of an actual character to be played with there, and whatever characterization they have only plays in for exactly the morality play and nothing else. It's a very prescriptive amount of writing that I don't think plays well in serialized comics, because we spend too much time with the characters to not only want, but in a way need to see more from the characters in order for them to really come off the page. Because if they don't have any aspects of their lives or any thoughts or ideas kind of their own outside of their one thing, they're breathing plot points, they're not characters. So he's an earned muscle idea that Daredevil loses a fight and then wins a fight for. It's a way to have a villain to hero without it being so obvious in a way as well. I don't know, just very tropey. Then we get to the bit where Elektra comes in bit more readily, as she's been training Matt because Matt has lost focus, and so he needs to learn to control. And then as we get here and we deal with this control and them learning to work together, he finds that he's been going after the small fry and chasing all the wrong things, and that he needs to go bigger or attack things differently. And in doing so, they deal with those billionaires I talked before because they're planning this big to-do with Hell's Kitchen, basically as a way to just stick it to Fisk. But they don't have privy to all that information, but they do stick it to the billionaires, and they move some money around that throws this plan off in a way. But in the process of doing so, Elektra steals billions and kind of runs off laughing. We find out later this money is to fight the Hand, and that there's something going on there, but Matt isn't aware of that, near as I can tell, by the end of the series. But I also think we're supposed to be aware of the idea that Matt is aware of this by the end of the series, because there's clearly conversations that happen between issues with characters that have time together, which is... It's frustrating, not because things are happening, between panels or that we have to see everything, but because for there to be any mystery or any care to the plot thread for these kinds of ideas, and keeping track of what characters know, which pieces of information, if we aren't shown when that information is handed to them, which also serves as kind of a Marvel tool for reiteration for any issue. Could be anyone's first issue, which I think was abandoned years ago, but I think there's a certain ethos of the idea that there has to be a certain amount of reminder, and certainly not that everyone's picked up every darn issue, despite my best attempts. That reiteration serves more also for readers who are reading, but maybe reading a bit more casually and need a reminder, because this thing is 36 issues that happened with breaks due to COVID and whatnot, and I believe some other delays along the way. I don't really know. I just got it all in a big bundle. Over a few years, some of the plot point that happened storylines ago could use a refresher. That just happens in storylines telling anyways, and in highly acclaimed series, whatnot. It's not a bad idea to do from time to time. Shown here, there's something with the Owl too, who's played as one of the main lieutenants, which is interesting because they focus on the Daredevil villains, and this one villain that Zdarsky is really focused on, the crime mafia boss lady. But the Owl, the Kingpin, is there. We get like Cottonmouth and nods to other big crime lords in New York that happen during this run, which is weird because this run kind of starts at the height of Daredevil hype and whatnot in the media, with the his series continuing and the Defenders run having happen, and the run of comics that happened with the Defenders, a la those Netflix series characters, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist, and then Colleen Wing, I think, as well, Misty Knight, being there, and that Defenders run has kind of a play of relevance earlier in this book that wanes as this focuses more to this new age of Marvel, where the archetypes are so represented that in order for it to be a big moment, you have to have like certain Avengers there, certain other characters, and that's weird. And so as we see different Marvel characters pop in and out throughout this run, it's weird because the Punisher's there as kind of the Daredevil Punisher ethos thing at the beginning that's been done so many times since Frank Miller had that early in his run. We have Mr. Fantastic really show up 2 times in this run, at the beginning and at the end, as Matt is dealing with something, and I think more interesting in the beginning, Matt asking Mr. Fantastic, do you believe in God? And the conversation that ensues from there, and I think Reed's answer is actually kind of interesting, though written in a way that Zdarsky writes that doesn't, again, feel like a Mr. Fantastic that I've seen or read anywhere else. It's a little too pedestrian for that. And then later we have this call to the ending, which deals with a bigger media moment. And Mr. Fantastic is worried about something like the Mutant Registration Act coming back, which is kind of weird the way they play it, because he should be worried about that coming back, but he was the villain there, and kind of arguing for what he's arguing against now, um, in a weird way, because he's arguing for the system, but in kind of a weird way. I don't know. What's interesting, though, is for all that I'm talking about, and I jumped ahead a bit, I know, but it's 18 issues, effectively, of small plot beats and place setting with small stories to kind of get to the larger story. And then Inferno happens in 2 issues, which is a huge scale attack on New York that involves a lot of the Marvel cast and the entirety of the cast built so far, as New York burns down and things go awry. And so much happens, and then now I don't know exactly when you're supposed to read this annual, but I read it about here, and I think you should read it about here. Arguably, I think it happens a couple issues later in the run, but given that Inferno happens, it feels like there should be a pause, but not in the way the run continues. So this annual is important because it takes a narrative gift that's sole left for the future writers of Daredevil, where Mike Murdock is out on the loose. This annual takes it and does the Dawn from Buffy trick, where now Daredevil, Matt, has always had a brother, which sucks. And I hate it. I hate that conceit. I hate when people magically add family members or stuff like this. It's half the reason I think people hate One More Day, which, like, why do they keep going back to this well? One More D-Day, if you can't read it. This sucks so much. And it's not that it's so poorly done, or it just sucks. But now Mike Murdock is a thing. It's shit storytelling. I don't know. I can't even fully break down why it's so bad, because every aspect of it is bad. You're rewriting history for no good, which adds a weird layer to any past issues. You're fucking undercutting a number of other things. The idea of Matt's solitude in being an only child within the Catholic, but like, so much of what's been built on so far, Zdarsky just kind of shits on in his own way, because he wants to do it this way, because for him it made for a couple moments that, for the most part, he doesn't even actually fucking need to tell his story. It is so fucking shit. He shits on so much history for nothing. There's no gain. It's so lazy. The fact the editors didn't step in is actually irresponsible. They're not doing their job at this point. If you give a shit about these stories and these characters and these things, that's the sort of thing that should piss you off in canon, not fucking what costume people are wearing or whatever. It's so shit. Okay. We move forward. Somehow. Daredevil comes off of this, and he's a hero, I guess. Except that he's convinced he now needs to go to jail, because at the start of the run, and I forgot about it because it feels almost unimportant, especially with the Punisher thing, but I guess it makes the thing with the Punisher even stupider in retrospect, is that Daredevil killed someone when struggling with coming back. Went too far. Accidentally killed them. Happened to all the Defenders, but he freaked out at them. Woo. So he's place setting for when he goes to jail, which leads us to this, which is supposed to be Iron Man and Daredevil, but I thought it was Loki. God, that would have been more fun. talking about like the system and what they do and yada yada, and Iron Man becomes like a side player in this run, which is stupid. And then we get this big talk between Daredevil and Spider-Man before he goes to jail, where actually they set it up and they're antagonistic half the issue, and then they have 2 or 3 pages where there's narrative about them having a heart-to-heart conversation, but not actually showing it or telling it, and it's dialogue that we're not getting. Come on. But then we get to the trial, and it looks like Matt's going to take a plea bargain based on yada yada because people are trying to convince him going to jail isn't actually any good. And there's talk in here that's actually interesting about the idea that we know that jail doesn't actually make anyone better or help them repent for their crimes in any way within a societal context. But Catholic guilt wins out, and also the idea that Elektra knows that Matt is Daredevil comes up, and that tells him that he needs to do this for 2 years. Doesn't really make sense at all, especially considering what follows. So now for the rest of the run, basically, Matt's in jail. He fights symbiotes during the King of Black. Elektra's out on the town in a new costume fighting as Daredevil. And Fisk had found Typhoid Mary during the big Inferno event, where she was living as a nun, but doing weird stuff in the church, I guess. And apparently they had a thing in the past. This is weird for me because I don't remember, and maybe I read something and I just don't remember because it was years ago. But the last time I remember seeing Typhoid Mary was in 97, I believe, where there was a Deadpool Daredevil crossover annual where she's kind of at the heart of it because she's dealing with Deadpool, and I hope I don't mix up these names. She's dating fucking Deadpool, and Daredevil comes in to be like, you don't want to mess with her, Deadpool, she's messed up, which is the... at this point, I assume Daredevil doesn't really know who Deadpool is, and this is relatively early into Deadpool being a Marvel character. It's a good annual, but that kind of like idea of it is so stupid. Deadpool calls him out on it immediately within the comics, so it works, but it's just... That's the last I really remember of Typhoid Mary. So the idea that Fisk is in love with her, like in a weird, like Vanessa kind of way, not like whatever. And also, she's supposed to be like so hot to men, but I'm looking at the way that she's rendered. She has big like 80s hair and looks kind of dumpy. I don't know. I mean, the heart wants what it's... I'm not trying to... But, I mean, it's weird. And so we have Elektra on a lot of the covers from here on out because she's a hot woman, and who doesn't want that on your covers, I guess. But, again, with the fucking 80s hair. Whatever. But she takes in a girl, and there's a lot of talk with her with the play of strong and weak, which... Is that her thing? I haven't read a lot of like Elektra solo whatever, so maybe I'm just forgetting, but it felt kind of weird to be having this like objectivism philosophy thrown in for someone who's trying to do better. But she's trying to earn Matt's trust to do this thing with the hand to take them down pretty well permanently or for the foreseeable future. But it requires a king and a queen, and one of them will die. So that's what Zdarsky's written in. I don't know. So there's this cover. don't know. Now there's another big thing happening. There's Bullseye out on the loose, but he's cloned, I guess. So we have a bunch of clones of Bullseye running around until Bullseye tells all of his clones to kill each other. So the idea is the play of like, how is he killing so many people? Because he racks up a like triple body count pretty quickly, which is kind of freaking insane. I don't think Maximum Carnage ever got that far. And that's just happening. They're trying to like triangulate and figure out how he's moving so fast. But you find out it's just there's a lot of him, but they're these like weird clones, and then he wipes them all out because Elektra threatened his ego. Okay. Okay. So she's dealing with that. She's dealing with this kid who kind of like helped her find Bullseye, but then is gone. But there was a moment with her, and then the kid accidentally kills someone who's actually a member of the Hand, so the Hand's already closing in. Okay. But the kid feels bad. But she's like, you killed, who cares? Where was I going with this? She's doing all this as Daredevil to earn Matt's trust, so she's following a code, but she's also at the same time being like, I don't have to do this like Matt. Which is also weird because she was training Matt, and Matt was already saying, I don't need to do things like I had before anyways. So I feel like Zdarsky's main thing is the way Daredevil has been operating in the past is stupid. Woo, what a great guy to get to write your comic. Okay, so we have that. Meanwhile, Kingpin's dealing with these crime boss problems. The billionaire stuff has kind of waned off. We get a final nugget on that for this run, at least. I don't know, there's a lot of place setting with Kingpin, but nothing's really happening other than the idea that he's marrying Typhoid Mary, which is weird. But he's mad because she went out to go take out Bullseye, and Typhoid Mary goes to fight Bullseye, also in like a Daredevil outfit. So you have Typhoid Mary and Elektra dressed up in Daredevil half cosplay fighting Bullseye. It's weird, it's fetishy, and it's funny for that, specifically because one of the things that pissed me off in one of the early issues is Zdarsky has Daredevil hook up with some girl. It's literally just like a one-night stand the character's never seen again. And she's like, oh, I like the fact that you're blind. He's like, don't make my disability your fetish. And I was just like, why am I reading that? Oh my god. Why am I reading this? And then he does all this weird fetishistic crap throughout his run. And it's like, he's not, like, he knows, like, the things that are politically correct to say, but he doesn't understand, like, the larger ideas that he's tackling within the text, which makes it really frustrating for stuff that is kind of, like, comic book fare, but then to do it that way and then have that earlier in the run makes it frustrating because it's a contradiction that is in the text but not what the text is about in any way. It just feels like he doesn't know the strings he's pulling on. It's frustrating. I am just rambling here. Okay, so where was I with that? Elektra. So then we come back to Matt, I guess. Matt is in the prison. The warden is mad at him because he put away his son years ago or other things too, I guess. Anyways, the warden's bad. Matt gets beaten up and stabbed and pulled into a hospital, at which point he gets an FBI deal. And then he's going to help the FBI take down the bad warden, but he's going to serve his full term, whereas they want to get him out of prison. Okay. But before this, We have him talk to a psychologist in the prison who's this black lady who's portly, so of course she's a certain way. Um, and they talk about this idea that he's like this misery tourist, and she's like mad at him for not getting psychological treatment, and like he's not supposed to be here, and the fact that he's in a mask means all these things, and it's just like Zdarsky wants to say something about the criminal justice system, but he never fucking does, really. And he doesn't have any ideas about anything other than right and wrong, and that prison bad, but like, and so we're left with this like garbledygook of what are you trying to say? What are you trying to point to? If you're trying to talk about the complexities in the prison system, when you put it this far down the comic book line, because what happens is the warden does something bad, and that they know that some prisoners are dying. What they find out is that prisoners are dying not only on the grounds but off the grounds, because there's this drug called Revid, which is like a goddamn shitty wannabe metaphor, but it fails. The idea is that it increases violence and antisocial tendencies, whatever that's supposed to mean. And then these people who are affected then pass it on to their communities, whereas the idea de luxe, it's passed to these communities, so people are brought into the prison. There's this whole idea of the economic prison system, with unemployment rates and yada yada. Okay, then. But they don't do anything about it really, other than know that it happens, shut it off in this prison. What about the others then in Marvel? Nor do they talk about the societal effects or talk about which communities are affected or do any follow-up. Daredevil then is magically cured of this. I guess they flush it out of his system, but I mean, if it's supposed to have these lingering effects, whatnot, I don't know. But while he's on it, he beats up that cop that I talked about earlier, and he's all fired up, literally, because there's all this fire and whatnot, and yada yada. And then we get to issue 36, the final issue of the run. Daredevil's out of prison because he decides to be. Okay, that's kind of on the table the entire time. Elektra's with him, working together, even though they shouldn't be, and they play at that, but then they didn't, and now they are. Fisk is getting married. And it's just this, like, okay, we're kind of at a point now where, like, the story can start because all the pieces are set. And there's a big talk of Matt being like, everybody wants to see what my next move's going to be. And it's like, well, okay. And I guess that's Devil's Reign, but okay. So it's 36 issues to get to what feels like should have been, I don't know, 18 issues worth of story. And I know there's a lot that happens, but it's just really frustrating. And I want to rewind again, because there's this thing he does through a number of issues that's infuriating, that happens especially like with that when Matt decides to go to jail, where there's a conclusion that's reached that we're going to do to move the plot forward that we could almost just jump ahead, but then there's this kind of like switch where it's like, oh, it's going to go the other way, and then we land on it again. And that happens multiple times throughout this run, and I realize happens multiple times throughout Zdarsky's writing, where there's this kind of bait and switch. And it got to the point where when it happened in the last chunk of this run, I was like, here we go. I know we're going to land here because we started here, and now we're fighting it. It's just going to go this way again. he writes in a way that's so formulaic it becomes predictable over time. It's hard to appreciate this run in some ways, but there's so much kind of going on. There's a lot of weird morality play stuff. There's a lot of good things going on in this run, and I don't think it's terrible necessarily, but it's frustrating because the craft and the lack of vision and the lack of foresight, not of the plot, but of the meaning of the story, is so waning that it undercuts everything that this run's actually trying to do and instead makes it just trying to be a dramatic roller coaster. And whereas people are enjoying the ride now, this run is not going to be remembered as favorably in years to come once things calm down and there's the new hotness to latch on to. I want to be clear, I'm not saying this is bad, but right now people are saying this is one of the best Daredevil runs of all time. That is going to go away within months after Zdarsky steps off the book, which is going to be a while. But when we finally get there years from now, like, this will be remembered as a longer run more than anything else. So there you go. I don't know. Woof. Woof.